You're listening to the 4-Phase Cycle Podcast with your hosts, Dr. Alex and Megan of Zesty Ginger. If you're looking to naturally balance hormones and learn how to work with your body instead of against it, you've definitely come to the right place. As a duo of an integrative MD and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and best friends, we use the 4 phases of the female cycle in combination with functional lab work and mindset practices to transform the lives of the women we work with.
We also have a whole lot of fun along the way. If you're new around here, it's best to start with season 1 before jumping around and plan to roll up your sleeves. Showing up for ourselves and enjoying our lives is what good health is all about. Just a quick reminder though, this information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making changes.
Hello, party people. Dr. Alex here. Thank you so much for coming back to our advanced Podclass series. We are back and we are going to talk about estrogen today, which we talked a lot about the estrogen and progesterone story in the very first Podclass of this season. And so if you haven't listened to there, please listen first because that will help with the setup. However, here we're actually going to talk about we're just going to review how estrogen was, told to be made. And then there are 2 phases of metabolism we'll talk about specifically, but then there's also a third one that I will just briefly mention. And of course, please recognize that estrogen is a really complicated subject and there's a lot that goes into it, but there's a lot that we're going to cover here that is going to uncomplicate it and just make it a little bit more simple for you to understand what's going on. So, estrogen creation, again, like we said, is set by the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is what tells the ovaries via the pituitary to make a certain amount of estrogen at any given time in the cycle. Now, that's not the only thing that can create estrogen. For example, if we have a lot of adipose tissue, that is to say fat tissue, that can have an enzyme in it that transforms testosterone into estrogen. But again, I never blame anything on obesity because a lot of people are getting this type of functional testing because they can't lose the weight. The weight is actually a symptom and a clue as to what's going on. So really blaming their adipose tissue for anything, if they could do it, they would have already lost it, right? So it seems very circular and nonsensical to me to then kind of put it on that. So yes, we want to shift the body so that the weight isn't held on. And then once the body gets rid of the weight, the aromatase enzyme will go with it. So that's my thinking. And again, you can hear in this whole series, these are Megan and I's understanding and our values, and you can certainly hear differences probably in where you have worked with providers, but we're only just sharing how we work so that you can decide, does our way jive with you? Does that seem to make more sense or not? If not, then great. There's other providers doing other things. So certainly, please understand this is not the only way to do things, but it is our way and our understanding. And because we're always going for root cause, we don't like to go in and just cover up a problem going on. We're actually doing the long-term work to decrease why that's even going on in the first place. Now, that is also in the same vein. We love DIM, right? DIM is a compound from cruciferous vegetables that helps metabolize estrogen out of the body appropriately. And DIM, especially when it's an isolated compound, really helps with estrogen dominance. However, what we think is that it's really misused a lot of the time. For one, if there's estrogen dominance, there has to be digging into why the body is signaling the wrong thing to begin with or allowing the wrong thing to happen. So that's where the interpretation of all of the Dutch goes into play here. And that's why we don't just get levels in the blood and then call it good enough, because that's not the root answer, right? That's not helping us figure out why the body did that and create a scenario where it no longer needs to do that. The body does not do anything willy-nilly. It is all well thought out, designed to protect you. Now, it may be malfunctioning, but that doesn't mean that it's not there to protect you. So we just want to be really conscientious of why is the body doing that, and then addressing that. Same with when estrogen dominance, when there's a lot of estrogen mimicking compounds coming in, of course, that also needs to be addressed. But this is why we have to consider that side of the equation, what's coming in and getting made, because that will drive it. People take DIM for like 2 years, and it's like, why on earth would anyone be helping drain the estrogen without considering why it's getting made in that way to begin with? Right? And so that's why to us, we're like, whoa, people are using this in a way that really it was not designed for. The other thing that happens with DIM a lot is that people will give DIM to a female without realizing a couple things. One, the first half of the cycle, we need an estrogen surge to ovulate normally. So when people take DIM all month long without any sort of understanding, sometimes that can cause problems. Now, it doesn't necessarily, but this is why you never hear us say everyone needs DIM, right? Because that's not actually true. And some people, it's actually inhibiting their ability to ovulate. So that's where timing with DIM is a problem. And the other thing that we see is a lot of times women's hypothalamus is malfunctioning in that 1 month their estrogen's high, 1 month it's low, or 2 months high, 1 month low, 1 month high, 2 months low, right? We kind of switch back and forth. And that's actually what characterizes perimenopause, right? It's the malfunctioning or the change in function of the hypothalamus, so that we go high, low, and that's what makes perimenopause so crazy making, because 1 month you're like, low estrogen, hot flashes, and you're crying in the bathroom, and the next month it's really high, you're bleeding really heavy, clotting, and you're screaming at your partner. Wait, these are the things that feel like we're getting jerked around. But again, if someone just gets a snapshot of high estrogen 1 month and the provider is not aware that they may go low the next month, that DIM is really going to hurt them the following month when it was really serving them the first month. And so this is all stuff that needs to be considered. This is why I'm not starting this conversation with like, let's talk about what we're going to do for high estrogen. Yes, we'll get into that, but it's really important for me that you understand how all of this gets set up, and that our responses to it are not just like, here you go, take this for the rest of your life. No, that's not how we work, and that's not how we think is safe. So with estrogen, there's really 3 estrogen forms that we care about. 2 are the most common. So E1 and E2 are what they're known for. And of course, they have names. And then E3 is our pregnancy hormone, or E3 gets elevated when we have a problem with phase 1 estrogen metabolism. When we have a problem breaking down our estrogen and it's going down the wrong pathways, then sometimes the body will turn estrogen into E3, which is the pregnancy one, even when they're not pregnant, because it's a little bit safer and it's a little bit less estrogenic. So once, the creation of E1, E2, and ultimately E3 is driven by a lot of what we have been talking about in the previous pod classes. However, once we're here, the way that estrogen is broken down, phase 1 actually happens in the liver. And there are 3 metabolites, 1 good, 1 mixed, and 1, quote, bad, right? So the good one, it goes from E1. The good one is called 2-OH-E1. Now, that is our protective estrogen. So, you've probably heard women live longer than men, and it's that estrogenic activity that actually helps us be safer from certain diseases that men have to deal with earlier. And if anyone goes into early menopause, then they end up getting a lot of the stuff that men do in those age groups, right? So a lot of that estrogen activity is protective, and we need it around. And that's why women who are postmenopausal, often are given estrogen if they're low in it. Again, I have a pet peeve about people getting estrogen when they haven't been addressed. Like, why are they not making it to begin with, or not making adequate levels for whatever age they are? But still, my point stands. And so the 2OH is good. Now, the mixed one is called 16OH. Now, this one is mixed because it has some good actions, and it's our bone-building estrogen. But the 16OH is not so good in some way. And so that's the one that has actions on our vasculature, so our actual blood vessels. And when we have a problem with 16OH, there can be things like cyclical headaches or premenstrual migraines are linked to activity of 16OH on the blood vessels and dysregulating them. It can lead to worsening of things like Raynaud's, or when people have Prinzmetal angina, which is vasospasm in the heart. It can be abdominal spasm, poor blood flow to the extremities. 16OH is implicated in hot flashes, low estrogen but poor metabolism can also lead to hot flashes. And so all of these vasoactive symptoms are really under the category of 16OH.
Quick interruption to personally invite you to come join us for our super exciting and incredibly actionable free video training series coming up.
It's a 3-part series where we cover everything hormone-related that you ever wanted to know about. We share our top 5 favorite hormone helpers, talk through common hormonal imbalances, and discuss setting yourself up for success. Go to zestyginger.com/blueprint to sign up, or click the link in the show notes below. We can't wait to hang out with you.
Go do it now and grab a friend. We'll see you there.
Now, of course, if you're listening and you are someone with headaches, that can be caused by a number of things, but 16OH-E1 is something that we do check out with cyclical headaches because it can be implicated in them. And then 4OH is the one that's considered, quote, bad. Now, usually what people will say is that 4OH-E1 is carcinogenic, and that what they mean is that it induces cancer. Now, that is not actually 100% true. 4OH-E1 does not cause cancer cells to develop. 4OH-E1 is more accurately described as a tissue proliferator, as in when cells are dividing, they will grow faster in the presence of 4OH-E1. And so, yes, that is true for cancers, but it is also especially true for things like heavy bleeding, clotting, cramping with your period, right? It's making the lining of the uterus grow faster, so it's heavier, clottier, that whole shebang. It can make the tissues of the breasts grow, so that's fibrocystic breast tissue. There can be problems with fibroids. There can be proliferation of ovarian cysts. That can even be dull-looking skin. If you've ever been like, wow, my skin's just looking so dull, like there's a bunch of layers of dead skin cells, and they're growing faster, but it's not normal skin turnover. All of that can be implicated in this 4OH pathway. And so on the Dutch, what they do is it's really the ratio of all these metabolites that cause us to feel the way we do. Someone with heavy bleeding and headaches, there's of course things that we would want to address there. And so what they do is they make a pie chart, because it's the relationship of these pathways that really matter. And so if we're mostly green, as represented on the Dutch, that's mostly 2OH, then we're doing good. And then we're supposed to have, a little bit of the 4-OH, some of the 16-OH, but ultimately what we want is a nice level where most of it is going down the protective pathway and we're not causing other problems based on these other metabolites. So that is all phase 1. Now, this is where cruciferous veggies really shine. So Megan and I have seen some stellar before and afters on the Dutch with just cruciferous vegetables, and so we have a great deal of respect for them. Now, there's compounds in cruciferous veggies that give us a lot of the different choices for helping with estrogen. So with high estrogen and poor metabolism, we can use things like DIM if used appropriately and at the right time. We can use things like DIM because if someone has high estrogen, we can drop them. I think of DIM and another compound, I3C, as widening the drain of the bathtub. So it basically helps drain out the estrogen metabolites we don't need. Now, some people, though, will have low estrogen. Again, this is why you can't just grab a blood test. People can have low estrogen but poor metabolism. In that case, you want to very safely be able to shift the metabolism but not push down the estrogen anymore, because that's not actually what they need. And again, this is where DIM and I3C is sometimes used inappropriately. And so there are other compounds like oh gosh, why am I'm brain farting right now. Oh, sulforaphane, for that shifts the metabolism but does not lower the estrogen. And again, all of these compounds are in cruciferous veggies, which is where it's a little bit more of a gentle support to simply eat them rather than taking a supplement, which could cause further problems down the road. So if you hang out with us over on social media, you'll see us talking about cruciferous vegetables, but not necessarily ever you won't see us with a bottle of DIM being like, hey, everyone needs this, right? Because that's a heavy hitter and you really need to know what's going on for that to be used appropriately. But the veggies, those are phenomenal. Broccoli extract can be a great version of that as well. And then, of course, there are crossovers depending on what else is going on. N-acetylcysteine and resveratrol can help with this metabolism piece. And they also have other functions. And so depending on the entire state of the picture, I will pick the best supplement that's going to help someone in the most versatile way. So we really want to optimize our choices in terms of picking the one thing that's going to give someone the biggest bang for their buck. So that's essentially how we make that decision, and a lot goes into it, as you can imagine. But those are available to us for phase 1 estrogen support. Now, there is also a second step of phase 2 estrogen detox, and that is a methylation step. So many of you, have cared about your methylation before, and this is where, for this step, this is methylation of estrogen specifically. So it's very interesting. A lot of people know what their genetics are, and they do not always line up with this methylation step in terms of what they're doing functionally. This is why we usually check functionality first before we go any genetic route, because again, your genetics can be a number of different things, but that doesn't mean that you are expressing that genetics in that way. And that's why we really look at functionality. So this phase 2 is a methylation step. And again, this is a step where nutrient density, things like magnesium and zinc and our methylated B vitamins from organ meat. I know you guys have been listening to this podcast probably long enough to know I love liver, but this is where all of these things come into play. And then, of course, for someone who truly needs help with methylation, there are actual methyl donors. Sorry, I'm getting a little tripped up here. Methyl donors that help this step be a little bit easier, but it does depend on the functionality. We also like to get the neurotransmitter test that we get from Neurogistics because that has a methylation step in it as well. And so that can help give us more information on the systemic action of methylation going on in the body. But this one in the Dutch, this phase 2 step is methylation, but it's specific for estrogen. So, if we have a bottleneck in phase 2, then unfortunately we can begin to recirculate and reabsorb and reuse the phase 1 reactants that we made. So what we just talked about, 2-OH, 4-OH, 16-OH, those problematic ones can actually get recirculated if there's a bottleneck in phase 2. And this is why, again, we always want to check all along the chain. We don't just want to see what did the brain tell the body to make, because that can even look normal or high or low. But if you don't know where it's going along the chain, pushing phase 1 with a bunch of cruciferous veggies when your phase 2 sucks is a hard place to be, because people they're doing the stuff that they need, but it's not working because they don't realize there's a different bottleneck. And so here, this is really kind of fruitful to understand and look into and really just parse out, because then we can do things that are going to be as effective as possible. Now, to keep going, there's actually a phase 3 for estrogen detox, and that happens in the gut. And so for phase 3, this is where Megan and I harp over and over about the importance of having regular bowel movement. So the ultimate removal of estrogen from the body is going to happen when we go to the bathroom, when we have a bowel movement. When we don't go regularly and that, stool and the food just sits there in the gut, the body can actually reabsorb these estrogen metabolites, especially depending on the state of our gut flora. And then we can recirculate again some of these estrogens, so we're not actually eliminating them. So liver can be working very hard, but if the gut's not playing along with it, that can't happen. So that's where fiber is really important for women. And we play in the space of where people eat keto or things like that, or paleo. People are coming to us with those diets in mind. And while we don't, believe or we don't hate prescribed diets, we don't necessarily believe in them either. We really want someone to be eating what works for them. But again, sometimes people go inadvertently too low carb, don't get enough fiber, and then this estrogen piece really starts to play a role. So that step, one of the best things we can do is ensure that we are staying regular. So whether that's through probiotics, through food that are fermented, or if we can't do that, fiber or prebiotics or any number of things that we do are going to help move things so that we don't have the opportunity to pick that estrogen back up and then have to be on the hook for processing it all over again, because then it's going to contribute to the load overall. And you can see how very quickly that would become a problem. All right, so that is all estrogen metabolism, and I hope that was really helpful. I know many of you are dealing with estrogen problems, and I hope that gave you lots more options and things to consider about, things to work on with your providers. And of course, reach out to us if you have any questions at any point. All right, thank you so much for coming to listen. As always, I appreciate it so much. And as a reminder, if you could please help us get the word about these podclasses out. We want as many women as humanly possible to be getting empowered to understand how their body works and then know how to best take care of it for them. So that's our goal, and we thank you so much for your help with that. Alrighty, I'll catch you on the next podcast.
Thanks for coming out to hang with us on the podcast. It is our goal to transform the way women are treated in healthcare. And we need your help. We need your help to get the word out. We have a lofty goal of 1 million downloads. And we know that as this podcast grows, we're going to be able to reach more women, get more amazing speakers for you, and bring the most cutting-edge information.
If you found these podclasses helpful, please take a moment to text 5 women you know the link to the series. We appreciate your help so much. Can't wait to see you next time.